They said it began when he sent a light-hearted message from camp, joking that he wanted 2 loaves of her bread, and they explained he hadn't expected the way she would receive it or what she would do that same night, which left him teary-eyed and shifted everything between them, turning a small nudge into something deeper than either of them foresaw, and they said it on July 22nd, 2025, at 9:47 p.m. After sweltering practices in Miami that made veterans wonder why they still endured while he lay in a sterile hotel room that felt like a holding cell, muscles aching, mind wandering home toward the one who made him feel at peace, and they recalled how 3 days earlier she had called with excitement about a new cinnamon swirl sourdough she had perfected, explaining her process with fervor, speaking of temperatures, resting times, and the precise instant when dough signaled readiness, and they said he listened with a grin, caught in her delight over something that might have sounded boring from anyone else, then told her he wished he could taste it, and she promised she would bake one when he returned, 10 if he asked, and later, in his cramped bed as teammates snored, he typed a teasing text asking her to send 2 loaves to make camp bearable, ending it playfully and sending it off expecting a flirty reply or a delayed emoji, but instead, they said, his phone rang immediately, and her voice, taut with urgency, called him by his full name to ask if he was serious, demanding the truth at once, and when he stammered that he had been half joking, she broke in with a tremor in her voice, confessing nobody had ever asked for something made by her own hands, a confession that hit him hard, and she softened as she said that past loves had wanted glamour and glitter, not the flower-streaked, singed-fingered version of her, which stirred something deep in him, and she vowed she would send the best sourdough he had ever tasted, baked wholly with him in mind, and they said he had no idea what that promise meant until that night when she hung up and chose to pour all the love she struggled to say into loaves, beginning a sequence teammates would later retell like folklore, and at 11 p.m., while he tried to sleep in a narrow bed that wasn't theirs, she pulled on a worn chief's shirt and her grandmother's apron still stained with old flour and Sundays past, and she treated the bake like a vow, calling the family friend who had first shown her sourdough when her father was recovering from surgery, refreshing the recipe that had sparked her obsession, yet deciding it had to feel like home, like mornings they shared with coffee and music when time slowed, and they mentioned she had named her starter Susanna after his middle name, keeping it private as her tether, feeding it and imagining she was nurturing what they were building, and that night she baked 4 loaves like parts of a song, each one a tribute, a classic sourdough reflecting his steadiness, a cinnamon swirl recalling weekend comfort, a blueberry lemon crowning farmer's market memories, and a playful funfetti dotted with color because he loved her chaos, and they said she wrote notes for each loaf like charms, the classic for the steady love that grew with time, the cinnamon for sweet Sundays and the coffee he brewed, the blueberry lemon for ordinary days made special, and the funfetti for the way he let her be ridiculous and loved her all the same, and she wrapped them, as if she were sending a living heart, because to her they were pieces of herself he could hold and taste in her absence, and 3 days later the box arrived during a break between practices, and he walked to the front desk expecting something small, but found a package large enough to feed a team, drawing whistles and jokes as he carried it back, with teammates teasing about what bakery he had ordered, and he saw her handwriting and felt his pulse quicken, and when he opened it the smell drifted out like an embrace, but the sight of the 4 wrapped loaves and handwritten cards squeezed his chest, and a quarterback peered in asking if he was okay because his eyes looked wet, and as he read note after note until the rainbow sprinkle declaration, he was not only misty but openly crying in a room where banter usually drowned everything, clutching the funfetti note like treasure. And the head coach entered at the sudden quiet and asked what was wrong, and he, eyes red but smiling, said his girlfriend had sent bread, which confused the coach until he stammered out that she had stayed up baking after he had teased about missing her food, and a defensive star studied a loaf and said it looked like the kind of artisan bread from high-end restaurants, praising her skill, but he was elsewhere in thought, picturing her at midnight, flower in her hair, turning a silly text into love tangible, and he said he needed to call her. But a friend pulled him back, warning that phoning in tears over bread might sound insane, asking what he could even say, and he replied that he would tell her he loved her, not as a routine phrase, but as a truth sharpened by her gesture, that he felt seen in full, and they said this next part would echo for years as a lesson about love steadying even a locker room, because he stepped outside and called her, and she answered instantly, bubbly and anxious to know if it had arrived, beginning to explain the odd funfetti choice before he cut in. Voice thick, saying he was going to marry her, and silence stretched so long he feared he had ruined something until she whispered his name, asking if he was still there, then said that wasn't how proposals worked, and he rushed to clarify he wasn't proposing in that moment, only stating that when the time came he would ask, and when he did she should remember this night with bread, notes, sprinkles, and the revelation that small, specific gestures outweighed big displays, and she still crying and laughing, said if he didn't stop making her cry over bread, she would be forced to bake him an entire bakery of feelings, and he asked her to promise, and she did. And they said 6 months later he bent on one knee in the same kitchen, scented by whatever experiment rose in the oven, and she said yes before he finished because she had known since that night when he cried before his team that he was the man who loved all of her, the star and the midnight baker, and he would forever carry the scent of fresh bread as a bridge back to the realization that love lived in small rituals, in someone staying up to transform flour into home because he said he missed it. And they added a detail that stunned everyone, that when he proposed he brought a carved recipe box engraved with Swift, Kelce family recipes, filled with cards of their meals as private language, the first card a love letter, opening with how love tasted like homemade bread and sounded like flour hitting the floor at midnight, and nestled behind glass were her original 4 notes, preserved like artifacts, the same notes that had made him cry in a locker room, the same words that showed him how fully she saw him. And they said funfetti sourdough became their wedding cake flavor not for elegance but for everything it represented, that love was messy, unexpected, sometimes rainbow bright, yet the sweetest truth. And their favors were small jars of a Susanna starter with instruction cards, so guests could tend it at home, because they wanted others to understand love, like bread, needed patience, daily care, and faith in the rise. And each anniversary she still baked 4 loaves with new notes, and he still cried because some traditions could not be outgrown, and the listeners were asked what they thought of a story, whether anyone had ever made something small with such care for them, which gestures showed them love, and whether a simple act had ever revealed someone was their person. And right then came a soft reminder to subscribe for more stories, and they circled back to how a joking text led to a delivery that silenced a training camp, while the strongest man in the room held paper like crystal and finally voiced what had grown inside him. And teammates would tell rookies later that they had seen a man learn not through rings or flash but through crust, and inked notes, and they recounted how after the call he brought the loaves back, sliced them, shared with linemen who tried to stay cool but fell quiet as the taste carried care, and one asked if she had baked all night alone, and he nodded, tucking the notes away like relics. And another joked that the funfetti was off limits because it clearly had magic, and he laughed through drying tears, and he told coaches he felt lighter than at any point in camp, like an unseen weight had lifted, and through film study he kept touching his pocket just to feel the folded paper, and later he admitted he hadn't realized how much he missed being loved in little ways. And that night he called to ask what she had listened to while baking, and she said old soul music and a playlist of their inside jokes. And he told her he had shared slices with teammates, and she liked the thought of her kitchen feeding warriors. And someone joked in the background she should be drafted onto nutrition staff, and she asked if the blueberry lemon crust was too dark, and he said it was perfect. And she said good, because she worried about oven spring on the funfetti, and he said it had burst like a confetti cannon, and they laughed about the little sketches she had drawn on each bag, and he admitted each note felt like captions to their life. And she said that was exactly what she had tried, and he told her again calmly he loved her, and she replied she knew, and they left the line open in silence that felt like a bridge. And right then another quick reminder to subscribe slipped in, and they jumped to a team dinner where staff teased him for turning the cafeteria into a tasting room, and he raised a water glass and toasted to small things done with great love, and a rookie asked if he had always been a bread guy, and he laughed that lately bread was teaching him lessons coaches gave in metaphors. And they describe how he began keeping a small jar of starter in his mini fridge labeled S, learning to fold dough clumsily on off days, and sending her photos of flour disasters, her replies full of arrows and tips, and how they started a shared phone note titled Rise Times, holding both baking schedules and tiny gratitudes, and he later said that note taught him patience